When descendants of the former slaves living in the U.S. demand reparation, they are given baseless excuses. It's said that because they did not spend their lives in slavery, why should they be paid reparation? However, what about those who inherited a vast amount of wealth and land from their white supremacist slave owners? If Black Americans are not supposed to get reparation in compensation for what was done to their ancestors, why are descendants of white supremacists enjoying the wealth once possessed by slave owners? That's when the entire argument of not paying reparation is dissolved. But where the reparation money would come from? According to estimates and reports, the U.S. owes about $360,000 to every Black American at least. Summing this up, it makes a total of $16.92 trillion for about 47 million Black Americans living in the U.S. Since no government has this amount, people have presented solutions. What about using the lands and wealth which descendants of white supremacists hold today? But how will that happen? And whether Black Americans can now get reparation very soon? Let's find out. Reparations for slavery is a way to deal with the long-lasting consequences of slavery and its impact on the African American community in the United States. The core argument here is that the wealth amassed by white slave owners back in the day, which was essentially built on the backs of enslaved African Americans, didn't just vanish when slavery ended. Instead, it got handed down through generations, giving economic advantages to their descendants. This historical injustice has led to disparities in wealth, education, and opportunities between white and Black Americans. Slavery was a deeply immoral institution that lasted for centuries in the United States, causing immense suffering and trauma to those who were enslaved and their descendants. It's seen as a fundamental injustice that demands redress. However, the question of where the money for reparations for slavery should come from is a critical aspect of the ongoing reparations debate. Several proposals have been laid out, each with its own reasoning and considerations. First, it was said that the federal government should pay for the reparation. The argument here is that the federal government bears a substantial responsibility for the institution of slavery, as it was glorified in federal law and protected by the Constitution. Hence, establishing a dedicated fund for reparations is a necessary step. However, there has been a debate that state and local governments alongside the federal government should contribute to the reparations fund. This approach acknowledges that slavery and its enduring legacy were not exclusively federal matters but also involved state-level elements such as state-sanctioned discrimination and segregation. Another proposal is to impose specific taxes on high-income individuals or on wealth itself to generate the funds required for reparations. The idea behind this is to redistribute wealth from those who have directly or indirectly benefited from historical injustices to those who have borne the brunt of them. Some proposals call upon corporations that have historical ties to slavery or have profited from it to contribute to the reparations fund. This may contain corporations rooted in industries like banking, insurance, or cotton production, which had direct connections to slavery. Not only that, but universities and institutions with historical links to slavery should offer financial support for reparations. This could include universities that benefited from slave labor or institutions that played a role in the slave trade. A more unconventional proposal suggests canceling certain types of debt, such as student loans or mortgage debt, for individuals from communities that have historically suffered from the effects of slavery. This approach aims to relieve the financial burden on these communities. From all these proposals, the argument of whether those who inherited the wealth and land amassed by slave owners should compensate the descendants of former slaves seems more practical. Those who have inherited wealth and land acquired through the exploitation of enslaved people bear a moral and legal responsibility to address this historical injustice. If it's said that the descendants of former slaves should not be paid reparation because they have not endured brutalities, then the descendants of white supremacist slave owners should also not hold the wealth generated from slavery. If this is done, this wealth has to be renounced. Who will have a right on this wealth? It belonged to the slaves who spend their entire lives generating this wealth for their masters. Legally and ethically, this wealth undoubtedly belongs to the descendants of slaves who are facing structural and systemic racism. Racism has had a severe financial impact on Black Americans, with estimated losses totaling a staggering $70 trillion dating back to the era of slavery. This substantial cost is deeply rooted in the historical wealth gap, where the typical middle-class white family in the United States possessed $149,703 in accumulated wealth in 2016, while their Black counterparts held only $13,024, representing a mere 8.6% of the wealth of white families. Sean Rochester, author of The Black Tax, The Cost of Being Black in America, attributes this wealth gap to the enduring legacy of slavery. In his book, Rochester meticulously dissects how racism and discrimination have inflicted trillions of dollars in economic losses on Black Americans over multiple generations, resulting in a total of $70 trillion. This discrimination has given rise to the substantial racial wealth disparity evident today. The concept of the black tax surrounds the financial burdens stemming from discrimination against Black Americans. Rochester, a graduate of the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, wrote his book to examine the financial ramifications of discrimination, bridging the gap left by researchers who primarily focused on the moral and ethical aspects of discrimination. The origins of the wealth gap date back to 250 years of unpaid labor endured by enslaved Africans. While it's challenging to pinpoint the exact value of this slave labor, estimates range from $24 to $97 trillion extracted from Black slaves between 1619 and 1865. Rochester employs an average figure of $50 trillion in his calculations. Despite contributing their labor to build the nation, Black Americans did not get a share in this wealth, owning only about 2% of U.S. wealth today. Throughout history, Black Americans were systematically excluded from government-sponsored wealth-building programs. For example, in 1863, they were denied access to the Homestead Act, which granted 160 acres of land to citizens in exchange for a nominal fee and 5 years of land cultivation. Over 70 years, predominantly white homesteaders claimed 270 million acres, valued at $1.6 trillion. Additionally, Black Americans were excluded from the Social Security Act in 1935, resulting in a $143 billion loss, and the GI Bill in 1944, which denied benefits to Black veterans and cost them another $45 billion. Even when Black Americans attempted to establish their businesses and wealth networks, progress was hampered or destroyed, often through violent means. The 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre, where a white mob burned down Black-owned businesses in the prosperous Greenwood district of Tulsa, Oklahoma, is a tragic example. Such disruptions and the relegation of Black people to low-paying jobs contributed to the ongoing wealth gap. To reach the $70 trillion estimate, Rochester factors in losses incurred during the Jim Crow and civil rights eras, highlighting that Black Americans were subjected to racial and economic segregation during this period, restricting their participation in the American economy. Today, the black tax persists through conscious and unconscious biases against Black people across various aspects of life. Discrimination in hiring and wage disparities remain prevalent, with white applicants being 50% more likely to receive job callbacks based solely on their names. Black employees with a bachelor's degree earn an average of $50,108 compared to their white counterparts $61,176. Additionally, Black borrowers often face higher interest rates when taking out loans, costing them over $760 million annually. Discrimination in homeownership also persists, exemplified by instances where homes owned by Black Americans are undervalued compared to similar homes in predominantly white neighborhoods. This proves the argument wrong that the descendants of former slaves are not enduring anything today. Yes, they are not slaves, but they are fighting racism in every aspect of life. Hence, they deserve reparation. You should know that reparations for Black Americans is deeply ingrained in the core principles of the American dream, which asserts that every individual has an equal chance to achieve the kind of wealth that covers life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. However, this cherished ideal has consistently clashed with actions taken by the U.S. government, systematically denying wealth-building opportunities to Black Americans. At present, the racial wealth gap is striking, with the average white family possessing about 10 times more wealth than the typical Black family. White college graduates in particular have over 7 times the wealth of their Black counterparts. To genuinely materialize the American dream as an equitable reality, it becomes urgent for the U.S. government to rectify its historical wrongs by providing reparations to the descendants of Black Americans. Reparations should take the form of individual cash payments designed to narrow the racial wealth divide. Furthermore, these reparations should include initiatives aimed at building wealth while addressing disparities in education, housing, and business ownership. In 1860, the assigned value of enslaved Black Americans' labor exceeded a staggering $3 billion, surpassing the combined investments in factories and railroads. The cotton produced by enslaved individuals in 1861 alone was valued at $250 million. This vast wealth generated through slavery not only enriched white slave owners, but also drove the nation's economy. all the while stifling any opportunities for wealth accumulation among the enslaved. To this day, the descendants of enslaved Black Americans have not received compensation for their labor, nor has the federal government made amends for the lost equity resulting from anti-Black housing, transportation, and business policies. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. Historical injustices such as slavery, the era of Jim Crow segregation, and discriminatory practices like redlining have systematically stripped Black Americans of opportunities to amass wealth. Merely advocating for individual effort and behavior change cannot bridge the racial wealth gap, as evidenced by the fact that white high school dropouts possess more wealth than Black college graduates. The impacts of these racial wealth disparities are far-reaching, impacting areas such as health, education, and economic well-being. Wealth is closely tied to overall prosperity and serves as a financial safety net during economic and personal hardships. The ability to tap into home equity, savings, and investments aids in swifter recovery following economic downturns, as demonstrated during events like the 2008 housing crisis and natural disasters such as Hurricane Katrina in 2005. Sometimes reparation is rejected as an impractical strategy. However, the history of reparations in the United States reveals that reparations are not unfamiliar to the nation. Native Americans have received land and substantial financial compensation for various benefits and programs as compensation for their forced displacement from their ancestral lands. Japanese Americans received $1.5 billion in reparations for their detention during World War II. Furthermore, the U.S. government played a role in ensuring reparations for Holocaust survivors, including significant investments over time through the Marshall Plan, while West Germany agreed to pay 3.45 billion Deutsche Marks to Holocaust survivors in 1952. In contrast, Black Americans are the only group that has not received reparations for state-sanctioned racial discrimination, despite the fact that slavery facilitated the accumulation of immense wealth for some white families. The United States had several opportunities to address the legacy of slavery, but has consistently missed these chances to fulfill the promise of the American dream. First, the 40 acres and a mule policy was presented, which was later paralyzed. Immediately following the Civil War, there was a pivotal opportunity for the United States to atone for slavery. Union leaders, including General William Sherman, advocated for granting each Black family 40 acres of land. General Sherman signed Field Order 15, allocating 400,000 acres of confiscated Confederate land to Black families, with some also receiving mules. However, President Andrew Johnson reversed Field Order 15 after President Abraham Lincoln's assassination, returning the land to former slave owners. Yes, instead of providing the means for Black Americans to sustain themselves, the federal government empowered former enslavers. In some cases, former slave owners were even compensated for the loss of their enslaved property. Many Black Americans, with limited employment options, returned to the same land as sharecroppers, essentially working for the very individuals who had once enslaved them. Later, the New Deal arrived in the 1930s, as the United States grappled with the aftermath of the 1929 stock market crash and the Great Depression. President Franklin Roosevelt implemented the New Deal, which included policies estimated to have cost about $50 billion at the time, which is equivalent to roughly $50 trillion today. Two key aspects of the New Deal, the GI Bill and Social Security, fell short in addressing racial injustices. Black veterans of World War II were unable to fully access post-war benefits like their white counterparts due to local implementation of the GI Bill, hindered by racial housing covenants and redlining. Social Security excluded two professions that could have significantly improved equity in America: domestic and farm workers. This exclusion effectively marginalized 60% of Black workers nationwide and 75% in southern states who worked in these occupations. These provisions were included in the legislation at the expense of Black veterans and workers to aid the predominantly white population during the Great Depression. These are just a few examples of policies and practices that have contributed to the racial wealth gap. Government-sanctioned discrimination, including the 1862 Homestead Act, redlining, restrictive covenants, and convict leasing, prevented Black Americans from accumulating wealth at rates comparable to their white counterparts. Separate from the legacy of slavery, damages should be awarded to Black individuals who were harmed by these policies and practices. While reparations have been granted to various marginalized groups, the federal government has consistently refrained from providing similar redress for Black Americans. To fulfill its commitment to closing the racial wealth gap and upholding the principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it is essential that the U.S. enact a comprehensive federal reparations plan for Black Americans. This plan should encircle both individual and collective public benefits, with the goal of simultaneously building wealth and erasing debt among Black citizens. A model for such reparations can be found in the Harriet Tubman Community Investment Act, which was recently presented to the Maryland General Assembly, featuring testimony from Ray. The Harriet Tubman Community Investment Act aims to rectify historical injustices related to education, home ownership, and business ownership. The U.S. government owes reparations for the lost wages and damages endured by the descendants of those it enslaved. These individual payments should be substantial enough to eliminate the existing racial wealth gap. According to the Federal Reserve's 2016 data from the Survey of Consumer Finances, white families boasted a median family wealth of $171,000, in stark contrast to Black and Hispanic families with $17,600 and $20,700, respectively. Not only that, but to address educational disparities, Black Americans should have access to tuition remission for both 4-year and 2-year colleges and universities. This support should extend to both public and private institutions, offering opportunities for expanded social networks and access to educational resources. Another essential plan should be about student loan forgiveness for descendants of enslaved Black Americans. It's because student loan debt presents a significant hurdle to wealth creation for Black college graduates. Roughly 40% of Black individuals aged 25 to 55 carry student loan debt, compared to 30% of their white counterparts. Reparations should also include grants for down payments and housing revitalization aimed at descendants of enslaved Black Americans. Down payment grants would offer initial equity for home purchases, reducing reliance on mortgage insurance loans. Housing revitalization grants would support the refurbishment of homes in historically neglected Black neighborhoods. These grants should be paired with low and fixed interest rates, along with property tax caps in devalued areas. In this way, a significant undervaluation of homes in Black neighborhoods, amounting to $156 billion, should be rectified. Not only that, but to foster entrepreneurship, reparations should provide business grants for startups, expansions, and property acquisitions by descendants of enslaved Black Americans. Black-owned businesses are often situated in underserved Black communities in need of infrastructure and economic activity. Access to capital from banks for Black business owners is limited, and these grants can address this disparity. In all that, the central idea would be to extract money from those who hold wealth and land of the former slave owners. Tracing this out has never been easier than today. Former slave owners and their wealth and land can be traced to find who inherited them. Then, taxes can be imposed on them, which can be added to form a reparation fund. You see, reparation is practical and easy. However, it was never paid as much attention as it demands. It's because most white Americans don't want reparation, showing racist sentiments. It becomes a concern that how Black Americans will survive and grow in a country which considers only white Americans as its citizens. What do you think? Whether land and wealth of former slave owners should be taxed or confiscated to be given to Black Americans? Isn't it true that this land and wealth were accumulated by using Black slaves and, hence, it's their property? Let us know what you think about where the reparation money should come from. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.